They said the cruelty of kings was endless, but some cruelties were crafted not for death, only for shame, to break a man's soul so completely that even hell would look away. Across the ancient empires, from Babylon's crimson palaces to Persia's marble courts, punishment was not a sentence, it was theater, and the stage was the human body. No one understood this better than the forgotten tyrants of the East, rulers who called themselves gods and believed that the body was the truest scripture of power. In the oldest clay tablets of Mesopotamia, there are stories that scribes were ordered never to finish. Lines erased, names struck through, but fragments survive, enough to tell us that one king, an Akkadian lord called Naram-Sin, discovered that fear fades when men grow used to death. So he sought a punishment worse than dying, a humiliation that would stain bloodlines. When his enemies were captured, they were paraded not in chains but stripped of every sign of manhood. They were forced to kneel before his throne, painted with sacred oils, marked as servants of Ishtar. To the court, it was divine inversion, the conqueror unmaking the conquered. To the world, it was blasphemy, dressed as justice. Centuries later, the Persians perfected it into ritual. Xerxes, the same emperor who once scorched Greece, learned from his priest that humiliation fed loyalty better than terror. He turned his harem into a court of judgment. Traitors were not executed, they were displayed, bound in silk, mocked by dancers, their dignity dismantled before the empire's gaze. The punishment was not in the pain, it was in the eyes that watched. Roman chroniclers would later steal the story and call it excess, but it was older than Rome, older than language itself. The idea that power was proven only when you could twist human desire into obedience. In Assyria, kings carved their victories on stone reliefs that showed enemies flayed, tongues torn, flesh bound to altars. But what they didn't carve were the ceremonies that followed. The slow degradation of the defeated, made to live as symbols, their humiliation recited like hymns before every coronation. They became living warnings, breathing monuments to submission. It was not lust, it was law. To rule, one must own not only the bodies of others, but the boundaries of what those bodies meant. When the Hebrews wrote of Nebuchadnezzar's madness, crawling on all fours, eating grass like a beast, they were remembering this kind of punishment, the erasure of kingship through the distortion of form. It was a political spell. Make the mighty unrecognizable, and the throne stays divine. Historians whisper that even Alexander learned from these rituals when he entered Babylon. He stood before the temple of Marduk and asked why the priests preserved those tablets of disgrace. They told him, because power is not measured by the sword, but by how deeply you can make men bow. And so the sickness spread west. Rome, Byzantium, the Frankish courts, all kept the memory, reshaped it, repurposed it. In medieval chronicles, you'll find records of the mirrored halls, chambers where captured nobles were forced to confront their reflections while the court laughed. It was said the mirrors were blessed, showing not what a man was, but what the gods saw in him. Frailty, guilt, desire. To survive the reflection was to be reborn. To break down was to be erased from history. None returned whole. But these were not merely punishments. They were sacraments, acts through which rulers reminded the world that they were not human, that they could unmake the order of things and still be adored. In the chronicles of Byzantium, Emperor Basil II, called the Bulgar Slayer, blinded 15,000 prisoners and sent them home in lines of 100, each led by a single man with one eye left. Not for strategy, but spectacle, a nation shamed through sight. And in the margins of those same records, a monk wrote a single line, later scratched out by censors. He took from them the gift that God gave Adam, to see and to choose. That was the secret of ancient cruelty, to take away choice and call it justice. By the 17th century, the language of the body had changed, but the obsession remained. Public shaming replaced torture, gallows replaced altars, but kings still watched from balconies drinking wine while the condemned were undone by laughter, not blades. History calls it punishment. But beneath the rituals of pain lay something darker, the hunger to prove that no man or woman could exist outside another. Yes, will. That is why tyrants invented the theater of humiliation, not because they hated their enemies, but because they loved the mirror of power, the reflection of their own divinity in the eyes of the broken. For every generation that followed, the idea returned in new forms. Inquisitions, witch trials, public confessions. The names changed. The act did not. And so when we read of those sexual punishments, the rituals of degradation, the ceremonies of shame, we are not seeing lust. We are seeing theology, the belief that suffering sanctifies order, that the destruction of dignity can somehow please the gods. But the gods never asked for it. Men did, because only men fear losing what they worship most: control. In the ruins of Nineveh, archaeologists once found a tablet so damaged that only one line could be read. The body is a kingdom, the cruel man is its god. And that is how history remembers them, not as lovers of pleasure, but as priests of pain. Their palaces rotted, their temples fell, but the idea they birthed survived, the idea that to rule, one must own not just flesh, but meaning. That is why even now their ghosts linger. In every spectacle of shame, in every ritual of public disgrace, in every headline that turns suffering into theater, the kings still sit upon their invisible thrones, watching. And in the silence after the laughter fades, you can almost hear them whisper, "Fear fades, pain ends, but humiliation, that is eternal."
They say a crown does not rest lightly on the head of a man, but some kings wore their crowns like blades, sharp, cold, and dripping with fear. As the centuries turned, kings across continents learned something darker than war, that terror could be sculpted, performed, and ritualized, a theater of pain made to remind the living who ruled the world. From their thrones, they became playwrights of suffering. In Byzantium, the emperor was called the vicegerent of God on earth. But behind the jeweled mosaics of Hagia Sophia, prisoners of rebellion were punished not with death, but with disfigurement. Eyes were gouged, tongues torn out, not out of rage, but to erase the face of opposition. For the Byzantines believed a blind man could not rule, and a silenced man could not lead. Every act was a divine metaphor. To rebel against the emperor was to rebel against heaven itself. It was not mere punishment, it was cosmic justice written on the human body. Across the cold north, in the halls of the Norse jarls, punishment became myth. Captured kings were not simply killed, they were sung about. Their deaths turned into sagas, their defeat transformed into legend. But beneath that poetry lay horror. They were made to face the gods, their pain turned into an offering, as if the gods themselves demanded humiliation as tribute. For the Norse understood a truth darker than steel. Every empire must feed its ghosts. In Mughal India, the punishment of enemies was wrapped in silk and ceremony. No blood, no swords, just a slow erasure of dignity. A noble who betrayed the emperor was stripped not of life, but of identity. He was made invisible, exiled to his own house, his name removed from records, his portrait burned. To the Mughal mind, oblivion was worse than death. It was the slow unmaking of a soul. But none learned the art of psychological torture like the kings of Renaissance Europe. To them, punishment became a mirror, a reflection of sin dressed in divine righteousness. The Inquisition burned books before bodies, for they knew that a man's words live longer than his flesh. And so they waged war not on sinners, but on memory itself. Each confession extracted under the Holy Seal was a rewriting of truth, until even the condemned began to believe they deserved it. That was the truest punishment, when fear becomes faith. Yet perhaps the most haunting tale comes from the East, where a nameless ruler in Persia devised a punishment that required no blade, no chain, no flame. When his general betrayed him, the king smiled and offered forgiveness. He gave the man everything: his title, his home, his freedom. But he also gave him a gift, a single cup of wine and a whisper drink, and you will live forever. The general did, and for the rest of his life he waited for death, but it never came. He lived as centuries passed, watching his children die, his kingdom crumble, the world forget his name. Immortality was his cage. The king had invented the cruelest punishment of all: to live beyond purpose. Every empire in history had its instruments of pain, some forged of iron, others forged of shame. But the most terrifying kings were not the ones who shed blood. They were the ones who understood the human heart, who learned that to destroy a man, you need not kill him. You only need to make him wish for death and deny it. Because the true punishment, the one no kingdom can escape, is that power never forgives itself. Every crown that once glittered has turned to rust. And in the end, it is not the punished who are remembered, but the kings who taught the world how cruelty becomes legend.